we're going to look at chapter 13. This is probably one of those parts of the letter that is most familiar to people. This is the chapter, it's known as the love chapter, right? This is the one that is often used in weddings. In fact, I'm doing a wedding in February, and they've already requested a section of this chapter to be read at their wedding. Of course, there's plaques that you can buy with this verse, or this chapter, or at least part of this chapter on it. You can put that on your wall. Lots of homes have this plaque. Or greeting cards, right? So you'll see a greeting card with this chapter on it. And so since we're talking about love, I thought I decided to search on the top 10 movies about love. Now, I was kind of probably being a little optimistic. I thought somebody might get creative and come up with some really interesting ideas because, of course, love can take many different forms. But, of course, what I found was movies about romantic love. So, I was kind of stuck. And it was interesting how hard it was to find a list, a top 10 list where, people kind of had a consensus. In fact, there was really no consensus at all. So I just kind of picked one that I saw at least a few of the movies that had been repeated over and over again. And here goes. This is the top 10 romantic movies. The first one, number one on the list, was The Notebook. And I've never seen this movie. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard of this movie, but it was on quite a few of these lists, so it might be something that I need to watch. Number two was Pretty Woman, which it's kind of an old one. I don't know how far back, it's like 20 years ago, right? What's interesting is actually my wife and I just watched this probably within the last month. It came on and I recorded and watched it. And then I've only seen this movie once, and it was in a theater, and that's the only reason I went and watched it, was because it was supposed to be like a remake of it, and not remake, but a remastering or something. And I think they had, if I remember correctly, they even had a live musical performance with the movie, but it was Gone with the Wind. Of course, that's a classic movie, and it's an older movie. Most of the ones on this list were not of recent vintage, but they were mostly of recent vintage. So Gone with the Wind is an older movie, and it's far more than simply a love story. And then the fourth one on the list, which was really kind of strange to me, again, I've never seen it, but just knowing as little as I do about this movie, it kind of struck me as strange, and that is The Wedding Singer. Let's go to the next one, The Wedding Singer. Have any of you seen this movie? I think it's supposed to be a comedy, but somebody put it on the list as a love story, so I guess it might be. I don't know. So it was kind of strange. Dirty Dancing was number 5. That's a little bit old as well. Titanic. Now that kind of fits, I think, more of a mold because you got some sacrifice going on there. You got all kinds of things going on there. Another kind of comedy, You've Got Mail, which was also funny to me because my wife was exercising the other day. This was on one of those old movie channels that she was watching. So it was like I saw the end of this like 5 days ago or whatever it was. Maybe last weekend, I don't remember. Another one I've never seen is Love Actually. Anybody seen this one? Is it good? Is it good? Okay. And then another one, again, this is so strange to me. There's a top 10 list, and half of them I haven't seen. 10 Things I Hate About You, which is an interesting title for a movie about love. And that is supposedly, I guess this was an adolescent romantic movie, so it's about teenagers. And so they threw one on the list. And then the last one, When Harry Met Sally, which again kind of strikes me as a very odd movie. And so I know there's something fundamentally wrong with this list because it doesn't have The Princess Bride on here, right? So that's missing. And then there was another movie, Casablanca, of course, which I haven't seen that one either. That was classic, and that was on a number of lists. But what is clear here as I think about this, what underlines this list for me is how often when we think about love, we think specifically about romantic love. That we think of two people falling in love, oftentimes in situations where there's a struggle, there's great obstacles. But 1 Corinthians 13 has nothing to do with that. That's not really what we're talking about. And I'm sure that many of you know that there are several different Greek words for love. You've probably heard sermons about that, or at least mentioned in sermons. So we have agape, and we have philos, and we have eros, and we have storge. And so these are various words that in Greek all can be translated as love. And it is often then pointed out that agape means unconditional love, and we're specifically referring to God's unconditional love. And that's not exactly true. That's not what the word means. In fact, there's actually some overlap between these various terms, especially between agape and philos. And in fact, these words can be synonyms at times. But what they do highlight, what these various words highlight, is the fact that there are various types of love, various meanings for love. And so the kind of love that we have for our parents, which is often the storge kind of love, is different from the kind of love that we have for friends, which is what philos often refers to, which is different from the kind of love that we have for a spouse. And we recognize that we can use love for all of those, but we're kind of meaning something different. And so we brought some of these words over actually into from Greek to English. So Philadelphia, where I'm from, right, the city of brotherly love. Or eros, we've brought that word over as kind of like erotic, and we think more in terms of sexual attraction. And this is the kind of love often that is the focus of those romantic movies. And so this type of love, this kind of very physical attraction, can affect us in profound ways. And I'm sure that most of us have had that experience at one time or other in our life. So perhaps think of your first crush, right? Maybe it was back in middle school, and the mouth would go dry, and the insides would get all gooey, and the heart would beat fast when you were around this person, and you thought, I'm in love. And you thought, I can't live without this person. And that thought went on until the next crush happened, and you're like, I'll forget that one. This is the person I'm really in love with. And so we often associate love with that feeling that we have. But what Paul is talking about here has nothing to do with feeling or emotion. He's talking about a love that transcends feelings. Instead, the love that Paul is talking about flows out of a conscious choice that we make. And so as we begin to look at 1 Corinthians 13, and is there any way to get these lights on, Justin?
Oh, are those not on?
One or two, or a half a light, so that I can read the text. But, hey, I'll do it from the back there, maybe. But as we think about this context, one of the first things I want us to realize about chapter 13 that many people miss is the fact this is not an interlude. This is not a digression from what Paul has been talking about. He's been dealing with this discourse on spiritual gifts. And it's not as if he was talking about spiritual gifts and he was writing this letter, and all of a sudden, boom, he got struck by this wonderful thought about love. And he says, well, I'm going to just take a break from that, and I'm going to write a poem about love, and then I'll come back and talk about spiritual gifts in chapter 14. And I'll just kind of stick this in here because I have no place else to stick it. No, this is intimately connected with the larger context. This chapter is tied in to what he was talking about in chapter 12. And so if you remember, last week we saw that some of the Corinthians were boasting about their particular spiritual gift, and they thought that their gift was better than others. And specifically what we saw was those who had the gift of tongues thought, well, this is the greatest gift ever. And I think, Bill, you had administration, correct? And that was not so hot of a gift, and people didn't really like that one. And so they thought, the ones with tongues thought that they were just more spiritual than others. And so Paul had to inform them that the gifts that they were given by God were not for their own benefit, but were for the benefit of others. And so he then highlighted how Christians are connected to each other as the parts of a body are connected. And then chapter 12 closes, and we really didn't hit on this part, but if we want to look at the end of chapter 12, it closes with a list of various kinds of gifts and roles. And again, not an exhaustive one, but prophets and teachers and all kinds of apostles and things like that. But he ends the chapter by saying two things. First, he says, but strive for the greater gifts. Now, at first that seems kind of odd because the whole point, it seemed like, in the chapter was that all gifts are important and that no gift is better than another, and don't look down on somebody's gifts. But if you look at the list at the end of chapter 12, what you should notice is, at the very end of the list, is speaking in tongues. And so if he's going to put this list together, and the gift that they thought of as the highest gift, as the one that's, the flashiest and most important gift, he puts at the bottom. And so he's kind of, it's a dig to them, thinking, okay, if you got to have other gifts, and then here's the last one. But secondly, we will see that in chapter 14, there is a way to rank the gifts, and that is specifically by which ones benefit others the most. And we'll see that in chapter 14. But then he ends the chapter by saying this, "And I will show you still a more excellent way." And this introduces this discussion of love. For it is love that drives the new age. It's the engine that causes things to move forward. Love is the secret weapon of the kingdom, even though it's not necessarily so secret. So as we read this first section, notice how it ties very closely into what we were talking about in chapter 12. So let's read the first 3 verses. "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing." So here Paul is talking about the spiritual gifts that he mentioned in chapter 12, but notice how he's doing it in exaggerated form, even what we call hyperbolic form. He says, if I have the gifts of tongues, of men, even of angels, so he's going to that level. If I have prophetic powers, not just prophetic powers, but I can understand all mysteries and all knowledge. He said, you take that gift and you go to the greatest extreme you can think of with that gift. I have faith, not just any faith. I have the faith, I can move mountains. Even that gift in that most extreme form is worth nothing without love. It's worthless. Because it is love that causes the gift to be used in its appropriate form and function for others, for the benefit of those around me. You see, even good things in the hands of bad people can be used for dark ends. So you can take the gift of God and you can twist it. And so their selfish and boastful attitude toward these gifts that they've received reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what the gifts are for. And love never looks down on or abuses others. Love's primary focus is outward. It's on the needs and concerns of the people around me. And so throughout this chapter, Paul will be using that word agape, the word that we often have heard perhaps in sermons and lessons means unconditional love. And it really doesn't mean that. The word itself means something like a quality of warm regard for others. It can mean an interest in somebody else. It can be translated generically as love, because words, in terms of their definition, are usually not necessarily as specific as what an author will do with them. And so the words are defined by context, how a particular author, in this case Paul, is going to use it. And so he is going to define it for us in this chapter. When he says love, what in the world does he mean by that? Because that word is so mushy. Right? When we say, I love you. What does that mean when I can also say, I love ice cream? Right? I mean, do you love me like you love ice cream? What's the connection there? So it's kind of a mushy word. What do we mean by this word? So Paul is going to define it for us and tell us very specifically in this chapter what type of love he's talking about. And what he's describing for us is what it means for a Christian to love others. The love Paul is talking about is the type of love that places the needs of others beyond our own. So let's read this description in verses 4 through 7. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but it rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Now you'll notice, at least at the beginning of this section, you're going to have 2 positive descriptors, the things that love is, and that's going to be followed by 8 negative descriptors. Here's the things love is not. And what's readily apparent in this description is that love is not a feeling. Love is not an emotion. It is not as if we look at our fellow Christian and we get warm and fuzzy feelings inside and we go all gooey and our mouth goes dry. No, that's not what he's talking about. Paul describes love with action words, right? Love is being patient. Love is acting kindly. These are two words that describe how we interact with others. It's not about going off half-cocked when somebody irritates us, but it's acting in ways that bring joy and peace to others. And also notice, by the way, that this is not a full definition. I mean, we could talk about love forgives, and love is merciful, and love is compassionate. I mean, all kinds of things that we could add to this. But Paul then is highlighting certain things. So notice the negative stuff. He flips it around. He says, love does not envy. It's not boastful. And what I want you to think about is how these negative characteristics address exactly what is going on in Corinth. Because some were boasting about their spiritual gift. And that most likely was causing others to be envious of those particular spiritual gifts. And they were arrogant with each other. And indeed, a number of these negative descriptors, love is not this, is addressing and referring to problems that are going on in the church of Corinth that we've seen throughout this letter. Not just the problems surrounding spiritual gifts, but you could go all the way back to the beginning in chapter 1 where they were having these various factions over loyalty to Paul or Apollos. You could talk about the way in which at the Lord's Supper the rich were being rude and arrogant to the poor members of the church. You could think about even chapter 8. Remember the whole discussion of idol meat. Do you remember how that chapter began? Look again at 1 Corinthians 8, 1 through 3. Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. That Paul takes their focus on knowledge, and again, he changes it and says the primary thing is not what we know. It's about love. It is love, not knowledge, that is the driving force for Christians. Love determines how we should act toward brothers and sisters in Christ. You might remember that in this particular section, Paul called upon them to sacrifice their own rights for the sake of others. That there was this call, you might know that you can do this, you might have the right to do something, but love dictates that you give up that right. So what we have here in chapter 13 is something that gets at the very heart of the Christian faith. What Paul is talking about is the fundamental change that must go on within each and every one of us, within each person. When it says that love is patient and love is kind, what we should read instead is Christians are patient. Christians are kind. Christians do not boast. Christians are not envious. That take that generic kind of love word out and put a very specific person in, because this is the kinds of things that we are supposed to be doing. And so, if you remember the story of the garden that we've talked about a number of times, going all the way back to Genesis, the problem of the garden that is described there is humans focusing on self. At the very heart of sin is an obsession with me, with humans wanting to be their own gods. And so once again, we can remember the way that works is through human kind of arrogance and the drive to make their own decisions and to do their own thing. They create a rift with God, and they're expelled from the garden. And you remember the very first story that happens outside of the garden. Cain kills Abel. That once you are disconnected from God, then what happens, and you're focused too much on self, then what happens is these kinds of things, brother against brother. And why did that happen? Do you remember? Because Cain was jealous, was envious of the approval that Abel's sacrifice had received. And all of the stories that follow throughout Scripture are full of exactly the kinds of things that Paul is listing in this chapter. Envy and jealousy and arrogance and wrongdoing and resentment. Because all of them are born from the same place. an over-infatuation with me, with self, with I. That's why love is the driving force of the new age, because it is what gets us outside of ourselves. I believe that love is the very nature of God within us, right? We describe God as love, right? And remember in Genesis, it talks about the fact that we're made in the image of God. And I think that at least one aspect of that, one fundamental aspect of that, is our ability to love others. And not in terms simply of a mate or family. You know, animals can do that. They can have concern for a mate. But I'm talking about being able to consciously make a choice to sacrifice my own needs, my own wants, my own security, maybe even my own life, for the sake of others who are not my family, who are not blood relatives. This is, after all, what Christ did for us. You might remember back in chapter 1, we talked about the message of the cross. Paul was saying the message of the cross. And I said that there were several elements that are involved in the message of the cross. Of course, there's the idea of forgiveness and atonement, reconciliation. But I also suggested to you that part of the message of the cross is a call to imitation. That Jesus is trying to show us a way out of the darkness of sin. And that path leads from me toward others. It is only by taking my eyes off of myself and looking at the needs of others that I can truly find life. And that is the perspective that we should have of all the moral instruction that we find in the New Testament. You see, all this stuff that we're told to do, it's not a new law. It's not stuff that I do in order to get to heaven. That what is being described for us is how those who are connected to God appropriately treat others. It's how children of God reflect the image of their Father. This is the kind of stuff that people who are connected to God do because God is love. And that's why the cross is such an important model, I think, for us. It not only takes away our sins, but it also shows us how to avoid sin in the first place. Because, you see, the law could never get us there. The law was something external that told the Israelites, here's the kinds of things you must do. But love is a power that resides within us. It's a motivation from the inside. It's the ability for us to see others as God sees them, and to be moved by that, to have compassion, and to then act in accordance with mercy and compassion. It's by taking our focus off of ourselves that we become free from the slavery of sin. So that's one of the kinds of things that I really want us to get out of this chapter, that it's not really about a feeling, but it's about a decision and a choice that we make. So I can see this even in our own relationships. So for example, with my wife, I love my wife. And sometimes that comes with very strong emotions. But then there will be times when, and not so much anymore because we live kind of far out, but it'd be like Saturday night. And she'd say, wouldn't it be great to have like a Jamocha almond fudge from Baskin Robbins? And that was a clue to me that I was supposed to get up and go to Baskin Robbins and get that. And my initial feeling is that, oh, I'm so excited to get out on a Saturday night and go get that for you. But I love my wife, and so what excited me about that was pleasing her, right? And so it was a conscious choice to do the things that I knew would make her happy. It didn't spur from this, yes, I'm so excited to get out while I'm nice here and comfortable on the couch watching this movie. I'd like to go out and do that for you. But I did it, and it wasn't begrudging. It was like, okay, this will make her happy, and so it made me happy to know that that would make her happy. And so as you think through that, and you recognize that love is actions that we choose to do on behalf of others, it becomes more in line with what Paul is talking about. It's not a feeling that we have. Now, in the end of chapter 13, you'll notice that Paul tells the Corinthians that the gifts are only temporary. Prophecy is needed, but only for a time. Speaking in tongues will also eventually pass away. But he says, in the end, at the end of the ages, when Christ comes again, and that's what he really means when he talks about the perfect coming. He's talking about the end time, the coming of Christ again. When Christ comes again, the one thing that will remain above all the others is love. Not some sappy sentimentality, not this warm, gooey feeling, but this powerful force for good will go into the new age because it is the characteristic quality of all ages, because it is the nature of God. It's what drives us to act on behalf of those outside ourselves. So then I started thinking, what was it I was expecting to find when I made that search online about movies about love? And I actually searched not about romantic movies, I searched on movies about love in that kind of generic sense. What was I expecting to find? And if I were to make my own list, I'd say, what should be at the very top of the list is the movie The Passion of the Christ, or something like that. Because that's the ultimate love story. Or something else, and I don't know how many of you have seen these, but there is this numerous stories where they're about sacrifice of people on behalf of others that kind of embody what Paul is talking about. And so, how many of you have ever seen Gran Torino? Have you seen Gran Torino? One person. All right. It's Clint Eastwood movie. It's really interesting. It's older. It's Clint Eastwood as an old guy, I should say it that way. Not like when he's young. But it's kind of this really interesting movie that he befriends. He's this kind of old crotchety guy, right? And there's some immigrants that have kind of moved into the neighborhood that he's lived in for a long time. And at first he's like, the immigrants are here. And he's not very nice to them. But then he kind of befriends this one individual and her family and the younger brother. And then the younger brother he kind of takes under his wing. And then there's some interaction. There's some gang trouble in the neighborhood. And the younger brother is kind of caught up in a situation that's not really good. And there's this fascinating twist at the end where this man who at first was somewhat resentful of the presence of this family in his neighborhood to begin with, ultimately sacrificed himself in a way that is somewhat amazing, where he gives up his own life to redeem and save his family. And I won't spoil the entire movie, but it's actually worth watching. So check that one. Another one that kind of came to mind was something like Saving Private Ryan. This is a classic. I'm sure many of you have seen this. You've seen it, yeah? Yeah, Saving Private Ryan. Which is interesting because, again, you're thinking, well, how's that about love? They don't love the guy. No, but it's not a feeling, right? It's actions, that they were doing what they needed to do on behalf of someone else, that they did their job and they ended up sacrificing their lives for the sake of this individual. So you have this platoon of soldiers, a band of soldiers that are sent out to rescue Private Ryan. And along the way, they all die. And at the very end, right, you have this ultimate sacrifice where, you're going to live and I'm going to give up my life for you. And it's not because I even know you. It's just because that's the right thing to do. That's what we're talking about. I don't do it because I want to. I don't do it because I feel like doing it. I do it because it's the right thing to do. That's what love is. Or last one, and I don't know why this one came to mind either, but The Matrix, the last one of The Matrix, right? There's all kinds of interesting kind of Christian imagery in the series, but this again is an old series. But in The Matrix, at the final one, of course, Neo has to give up his life for the sake of humanity. There's this long cycle of repeating itself where the battle between good and evil had taken on a kind of a cyclical dimension, and for him to break the cycle, he had to be willing to give up himself for the sake of humanity. And so all that kind of Christian message behind that as well. And so as you think through that, these are all kinds of stories that reflect what Paul is talking about, the kind of love that he is wanting us to emulate. Love is a choice. Love is the decision to act in certain ways that is best for others. And it's a call, I think, that God places on each of our lives. Not that we literally have to die for others, but that we recognize we're called to get outside of ourselves and to do good things, kind things, patient things, actions that will benefit those around us. And so that's why it's so disheartening, when I hear about and think about Christians who can't even get along with themselves. And I've been witness to a number of that. Internal Christian squabbles where in churches you have people who are fighting over funding of different ministries and different programs. Some people like the minister and some people want to get rid of them. You have debates over what the color of the carpet will be or the color of the walls. And it's just, you're thinking, okay, this is what the church is? or outside the Christian walls, at the church walls. You know, it's how sad is it that sometimes you can't tell